Καλησπέρα σας κυρίες και κύριοι.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michalis Goudis, director of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and we're at the end of 2021 and welcome you here in this online event, the European Green Deal and a Green Deal for Greece that is organized by Heinrich Böll and the Social Cooperative Enterprise of Renewal with the support of the Office of the European Parliament in Greece. In 2021, the European Commission has presented a series of suggestions to implement the European Green Deal, which is the goal to have a climate-neutral Europe in the future. Since then, we have specialized this deal, and it has been also criticized for its weakness regarding the goals on the member states level, which is often abundant in conflicted. We see that there is a lack of political will in order to implement these changes, coming also from the citizens who are not ready to implement these changes in their daily lives. The Heinrich Böll Foundation and the Social Cooperative Enterprise of Renewal have tried to reply to the question, how could a Green Deal be for Greece? And we asked researchers, organizations, and so on to contribute to this discussion that has started at the beginning of the year. And you can see on our websites 21 articles in Greek and English at the beginning of the next year. We will also publish a document that will summarize all these articles and also recommendations regarding these policies. So we're trying to co-create a green deal that will not leave anybody behind and that will help us in the transition to a new production and consumption way. This deal must be an integrable part of our societies, and this is also the topic of today's event. I must add at this point that we have simultaneous interpretation into Greek and English, and it is live streamed on our channel on YouTube. And you can find this streaming also on Facebook, and we are welcoming your questions and comments on our websites. This was my welcoming speech on behalf of the organizers. And now we will continue with the flow of our discussion. It's a great pleasure and honor for us and for the Cooperative Enterprise of Renewal to have the support of the Office of the European Parliament, of the office here in Greece, and we hope we will have continuous cooperation in the future. So in order to start officially, I would like to give the floor to the chief of this office in Greece, Mr. Tsoutsoplides. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Goudis. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be invited here. It's a great pleasure to support this initiative, this endeavor, and I would like to give you my congratulations to all organizers, because it's a very current, a very up-to-date discussion, because we all feel that it's a very important topic, but we might not know how radical changes we must implement in order to implement this new deal. We see that in Greece, there is a race after the devastations of this summer, where we had this feeling that we have climate change. It's here, it's a reality, and we've seen that many citizens have been asking for us to deal with this issue. The European Union has always been a pioneer in environmental issues, and in the last years in tackling the climate change, but we see now that we are focusing on the developmental standard, if we might say, that was promoted by the European Union as the response to the disaster we experienced due to the pandemic. right now, the European Union has a recovery plan, which is a financing tool that is based on 3 pillars in order to create a green, digital, and fair society. I think these 3 pillars are interconnected, and this is the reason, as said before, that we feel great pleasure when we see such initiatives from other organizations that bring us closer to the citizens of the European Union, that help us exchange information and knowledge in order to understand how an important imperative it is to adjust our lives as citizens and as organizations to a new standard in order to deal with these changing times. So I would like to wish great success in this event. Thank you very much. And I think this is the key question. How can the citizens be active participants in this process of changing our ways of living? I will give the floor to Mr. Chrysogelos as well, who will talk on behalf of the Social Cooperative Enterprise Window of Renewal, and then we will continue with our discussion. Nikos, you have the floor. I would like to be very brief. I'm very happy for this collaboration. We've been collaborating with Heinrich Böll Foundation for many years now, and it is very important because the citizens, I think, understand the necessity to contribute to these environmental issues that are part of our daily lives now. But I think we haven't realized that climate policy and Green Deals and the Green Deal are connected to social and financial targets as well. This was also said before. We want a Green Deal that will be for everybody, that will not leave anybody behind, and that will create a new social policy and new jobs and new opportunities for creative financial intervention. So that will be our discussion today, how we can create such a Green Deal. And I think we can already give the floor to our speakers to discuss these issues. And I hope we will continue this next year and have more specialized events along with all the articles that have already been published. And I think this is very important for our joint efforts. Yes, we have a long way ahead, but let's hope that this discussion will contribute to this process. I would like to remind you that, of course, you also have the floor, the audience, all of you attending this event from YouTube or from Facebook, and you can add your comments and questions, and they will be referred to here in the panels. So we will start with our discussions. For the beginning, we will talk about the more general picture of this discussion. So we will see how a European Green Deal could be working for everybody. Unfortunately, I must say that although we would have had from ICLEI a speaker as well, who would have talked about the local dimension of this Green Deal, she was not able to attend, but it's great pleasure for us to welcome Emmanuella, Lucy, and Alexandra Geese to this first part of the discussion. We will start with Mrs. Emmanuella Doussis. She's professional of international institutions at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. She is teaching about international European environmental policies and on climate diplomacy. She has worked at the Sorbonne University in Paris and at the University of Athens. And her interest in environmental issues goes back to when she was a student in Paris. After her first master in international law, she completed the second one in environmental law. Since then, environmental issues have been at the center of her research interest. Her most recent book concerns the role of international law in effectively managing climate change. Its title is International Law and Climate Change Diplomacy, from the Nomiki Bibliotheki of Athens 22. This is a publisher. Since 2018, she has been the chairholder of the UNESCO Chair on Climate Diplomacy at the University of Athens. She will try to give some information regarding the Green Deal, how this affects different aspects of our daily life, have these affects policies, and how a country can prepare to implement such a policy. You have the floor, Mrs. Doussis. We are looking forward for your speech.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Many thanks to the organizers for their kind invitation and for the opportunity to share with you some thoughts on the implementation of the European Green Deal, in particular in Greece. Allow me to start with some preliminary remarks and attempt to draw the bigger picture to understand the policy challenges and then highlight the main concerns for both the European Union and Greece, as well as the possible ways forward. Well, the European Green Deal is without any doubt a very ambitious plan, which has multiple readings though. The first is environmental. It is a project that attempts to protect the climate, minimize climate risks, and sets as a priority to make the European Union climate neutral by 2050. In other words, to bring to net zero emissions in line with its commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. The second reading has an economic and I would say a social connotation. The deal aims to create a sustainable economic model through a series of reforms ranging from the decarbonization of the energy sector to investing in green transport and from a circular economy restructuring to a new deal for agriculture. What is more is that all the challenges for the transition to more sustainable paths should be done in a just way, especially for those who will be most affected, that is the workers and the local communities that have been trapped in polluting activities for decades and now should shift towards two sustainable alternatives. And the process is moving despite the disruption caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The European climate law has made the political goal of climate neutrality into a legal obligation and imposed a new target for this decade to reduce emissions by 55% below 1990 levels. In July, the European Commission launched a package of legislative proposals which combine strengthening the existing climate policies with new ones dedicated to accelerate the necessary reductions and make different European Union policies fit with the new targets. Well, the aim of achieving this environmental/economic plan while combining a just transition where nobody is left behind is, of course, exemplary. But in practice, it poses many, many challenges. Meeting the targets will require huge changes on the way we produce, we consume, we travel and live, and the road is not covered in roses, at least not for all. So the real question is how to achieve a high degree of coordination between and within member states, which do not have the same priorities, capacities, let alone energy infrastructures. For example, persuading them to diverge from existing energy choices, to review their development plans and long-standing investments will be very, very challenging. Therefore, the success of the deal depends first and foremost on member states' willingness to follow the path. The starting points are different and member states should come up with their own decisions for tailor-made responses on how to achieve a common European goal. On the other hand, member states should not use the European Green Deal as a top-down affair and blame the European Union for national responsibilities. I think in this context, Brexit is a humbling lesson about the costs of creating false impressions of the EU. The deal has also a third reading, which concerns this time its international dimension. It is a plan that will inevitably impact on geopolitics. For example, it will restructure the relationships with neighboring oil and gas exporting countries, countries producing raw materials for renewable energy sources. It will also impact on trade and investment patterns, mainly through the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Moreover, if Europe becomes climate neutral, this certainly is not going to save the world, not going to save the planet, since the EU's emissions currently represent less than 10% of the world global greenhouse gas emissions. Worse, if the Green Deal simply displaces Europe's greenhouse gas emissions to its trading partners, it will have no impact at all on climate change. Therefore, another challenge for the European Union is to persuade other countries to follow suit. In the same way, it should work with its neighbors and other key partners to manage the consequences of the European Green Deal and to foster their own transition to climate neutrality. All countries do not have the same financial and technological capacities to follow the path. Therefore, the European Union should spearhead pathways by mobilizing public and private financial sources to assist neighboring countries to foster their economic diversification, shape their own just transition plans, and support adaptation and risk management projects so as to minimize climate risks. How does all this affect Greece? Well, Greece is not a big contributor to the climate crisis, but is directly affected by it. The Mediterranean is a climate change hotspot, and the situation will be much worse in the years to come, with intense heat waves and devastating wildfires, the sort we witnessed this summer. Thus, it is very much in the country's interest to advocate for robust measures and support international and regional initiatives. Now, the country is expected to align its development process with the Paris Agreement and the European Green Deal. But the question is, how does a country get prepared to implement the transition to climate neutrality? I shall only just try to highlight the key elements of this transition, which are, first of all, the strategic planning that will go beyond the limits of an electoral cycle. Second, the bold financial support of the plan. And last but not least, the support of its people and society in general. Well, significant steps have already been taken, and a policy for dealing with the climate crisis has gradually begun to take shape. The decision on the retirement of lignite plants, the Just Transition Plan that includes a long list of investments, the spread of renewable energy sources, and the priority given to the green transition in the recovery plan. All these are undoubtedly positive steps. Moreover, a Greek climate law is currently under consultation, and this law will help to better organize the transition to climate neutrality, focusing on the those areas that need more coordination. But are these steps enough to achieve climate neutrality? There are still several challenges and critical choices to be addressed. For example, a very first challenge is how to replace the electricity that lignite provided so far. Will it be covered by renewable energy sources with energy storage technologies, or by fossil gas, which could lock the energy system in a high carbon intensity plan for many decades? The stakes are very high, and we need to avoid wrong decisions like those taken with lignite plants, and prevent investing in energy sources that will be useless in the long run, such as those related to the projected hydrocarbon extractions. Another challenge is another challenge relates to the implementation of the Just Development Transition Plan of the lignite areas and the restoration of the surrounding environment. Given the very short time frame, the need for a successful process is imperative to mitigate the effects on the local economy and society. And then we will need more just transition plans for other people affected, those who cannot afford the necessary changes for the transition to sustainable paths. And finally, the support of society is absolutely necessary. Find a common language of communication to inform citizens as to why the transition to climate neutrality is necessary, and to keep them in the loop regarding the dilemmas that arise in this process, and that there are no magic solutions. Stakeholders and citizens should be engaged in an inclusive way, not only through the formal consultation process, but through initiatives and why not new participatory schemes that allow the co-design of sustainable solutions, the assistance in case of emergency, schemes that enhance the capacity building towards resilience. And I would also like to mention that resilience covers not only recovery from sudden shocks, but also brings the focus of the debate on how to deliver policies that can absorb shocks while maintaining function, policies that create enduring ability to address climate risks. And these policies require a long-term, integrated, inclusive, and holistic view of the related issues and objectives. Well, to conclude, I would say that what is needed for national and local authorities is to identify short and long-term priorities and catalyze climate action in a more inclusive way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Doussis, and for keeping the time as well. So summarizing the main points for those who joined us while you were presenting, you have talked about different readings of the European Green Deal, the social economic dimension. You have talked about coordination amongst member states that have different priorities and work at different speed. And the European Green Deal, as you have said, is restructuring the relationship between the EU and neighboring countries. So, of course, the idea is to try and help neighboring countries to be involved and become part of the solution. You have talked about Greece, and it is clear how complex this challenge is for a country, in particular for a country that may not be a big part of the problem, but is greatly affected and will be affected in the years to come by the climate crisis. So how can a country like ours be prepared at all levels of planning, of financial support, etc., and bring citizens on board? And I think that we will be able to discuss this a bit further. And now we move more to the West, and we will meet a member of the European Parliament, Mrs. Alexandra Geese, who's been a member of the European Parliament since 2019 on behalf of the Greens and EFA. She's an expert in digital green technology. She defends gender equality in the budget as a member of the budget committee, and we will focus on that in today's presentation. And she's the coordinator also of her group in the artificial intelligence committee, and he has also many other interests, including migrants, etc. And she focuses on justice, on participatory democracy in the digital space, and she also works on gender budgeting and gender equality. And this is the topic of her presentation. So she will talk to us about the gender dimension of the European Green Deal. And I think that this will be a very important aspect for Greek citizens to listen to what she will have to say. So I give you the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for your kind introductory words and for having me here today. The Green Deal and women and gender, the gender aspect, what does that mean? Usually when this is mentioned in an international context, it's in order to speak about women as victims of climate change. Because we know that, for example, in Africa, the less water we have, the longer the way is that women have to do to carry the water. The agricultural work gets a lot harder. And also in Europe, this is true because it has been calculated that energy poverty, in the case of rising energy prices, hits women harder because it's very often old women living on very small pensions or poorer families, female-led families who suffer energy poverty the most. But on the other hand, what we see is that the big climate movement is led by young women. So we see women as very strong protagonists actually in the environmental and especially in the climate movement. What I have still been experiencing in the past years, though, is that gender equality is still seen as a secondary goal or even as contradicting the Green Deal and progress in combating climate change. And I lived this, and this is why I'm so interested in the topic, because I worked on Next Generation EU, the European Recovery Fund that where 37% of this enormous European investment scheme is destined to be spent on the energy transition, on the green transition. And when I said, well, there we have 37% in green transition, and green transition sounds great, and I fully support it as a green politician, obviously, but it means energy, it means transport, and it means building refurbishment. So we have three industrial sectors that are basically male dominated. Very few women work in the energy sector, very few women work in the transport sector, very few women work in the construction sector. And then we had another 20% for digital. And as was kindly said in my introduction, I specialize in digital. And I think we do need to invest heavily in digital in Europe. But digital is the sector where you have extremely few women. It might be worse than energy. So we have this big investment scheme in Europe that was also thought to promote employment after the COVID crisis, if it ever passes. And basically 57% of the money went to male-dominated sectors, while we know that during that crisis, during the COVID crisis, it was mostly women who stayed home to take care of children when schools closed. It was women who lost their jobs or who quit and stayed home because somebody had to do the work at home. And it was the client-facing sectors, so the people-facing sectors where mainly women work, where most jobs were lost. And although this was a very obvious kind of thing, the European Commission didn't see it. They gave the money to male-dominated sectors, and in the first proposal by the Commission, women were not even mentioned. Because, and then I started a fight in my group, in the Green Group, saying, well, we need to get another priority, which is gender equality, because it's so obvious. And some people said, even in the Green Group, oh, well, but, you know, now we're focusing on the green transition, and that is really the most important thing. Let's not get distracted. And this is something you hear quite a lot at all levels. So is it really a good idea to focus only on energy, transport, on buildings, which is important, and saying, well, gender equality, we think about that later once we have faced climate change? It is not, because every study tells us that women make more sustainable decisions, no matter at what level they are. They make more sustainable choices as political leaders. especially if we see sustainability not only as ecological sustainability, but we also look at the social and the economic dimension. I think the previous speaker has already said we have to have a holistic view. The green transition is not going to work if we neglect the economic and the social dimension. And this is what numerous studies show, that women as political leaders, as heads of government, as ministers, make more sustainable choices. Women make more sustainable choices as business leaders. And that is interesting. The European Investment Bank told me they have a host of studies that show that companies led by women reduce their CO2 emissions quicker than those led by men, that companies led by women make more sustainable choices as a whole, socially, but also ecologically. There are unfortunately very few companies that are led by women, but that's a good reason to change that. And we also know that women as consumers make more sustainable choices. They prefer sustainable products. They look specifically for sustainable products. They are ready to spend more time in finding them. And as a whole, they spend more money on immaterial goods, like, for example, education for their children, rather than just on consumption. So what do we need to do in order to make the Green Deal stronger and more holistic, more acceptable to everybody? We need stronger female representation at all levels and all decision-making levels. That means particularly at political level, but also in all the bodies that make choices in terms of the Green Deal. And we know this is not the case because when I worked on Next Generation EU, basically who was taking the decisions, in spite of having a female president of the European Commission, 23 out of 27 ministers of economic affairs in Europe are male. And they just did not discuss the gender dimension. They ignored these studies. You know, you just ask the European Investment Bank. Everybody who has ever worked on international development knows that. You know, development aid, they're very, very careful to make sure a lot of the women are involved in the decision-making in every African village. All these small credit schemes work because the money was given to women, because women pay it back, because they're sustainable. And the European Investment Bank, for example, tells me, oh, we all do that. You know, we do gender budgeting and we make sure women are represented out of Europe. In Europe, there's no need. In Europe, there's a lot of need to do that. So get women in these decision-making bodies. Do gender budgeting. What does gender budgeting mean? It's every time you have money to spend, you have a national budget, you have a local community budget, you have an investment plan. Make sure that you do an analysis of the existing situation in gender terms, and then try to distribute the money in a way that benefits both genders equally, or that makes up for previous injustice. Involve women in the choices, involve women's organizations, for example, when you plan. You know, usually when you do a local budget, you know, the entrepreneurs associations will make themselves heard. The people having businesses in the city center will make themselves heard, but women's associations are never listened to. And that automatically leads us to more sustainable choices. Because, for example, when you do city planning, women walk a lot, and they use a lot of public transport. So you will give more money to building public transport or walkways rather than building roads. It comes automatically, and there are so many examples for this. When you ask women, when you involve women in the decision-making, you get more sustainable, you get more ecological, you get greener choices. Do gender impact assessments. You can, gender budgeting is a very complicated process, and the budget is a very complicated process, so it takes years to implement it. What you can do when you just have a project and you want to invest, like for example, Next Generation EU, is just have a gender impact assessment. So get an expert who is able to do an analysis and then make a reasonable preview of what kind of impact the money you spend on certain measures is going to have. This is what I asked you for the gender for Next Generation EU, and we had an agreement on this in Parliament, and in the end, Council, where 23 out of 27 ministers of economic affairs and 24 out of 27 finance ministers are male, basically just kicked it out. But this is something you can do at a local level, you can do at a regional level, you can do at national level, get a gender impact assessment. You will probably not be able to shift all the funds half to women in the first step, but at least you see what you're doing. Then look at the role women have as consumers and try to involve them in making sustainable choices. The banking sector, for example, is not looking at women as treating women really badly. Women want to invest in a more sustainable way. There are American banks who start to get worried that their businesses are not responding to market's need because they don't take women into account. So look at what help can women give in the ecological transition and the green transition as consumers. Another important point is when we speak about holistic sustainability, we still measure everything in GDP, gross domestic product. And we all know that doesn't measure really human well-being or the planet's well-being. But one very important aspect that you need to consider is care work. And care work is mostly done by women. It's usually very sustainable kind of work. So when we try to create growth, because we are, as Greens, we know we need sustainable growth, but we do need some growth in times of economic uncertainty and difficulty. And looking in the future where we know that automation and the digital economy will replace jobs, and we will have to think about new definitions of what labor is and what kind of labor we want to care for, we want to pay for as a society. We need to take into account care work, because care work is mostly done by women in an unpaid way, because you do it for your parents, for your kids, for your husband, for your relatives, or it's badly paid. And when women are in full time and can't do all the care work, what we do usually in Europe, especially in those countries that don't have a strong public sector for care work, like Scandinavian countries, we import cheap labor, cheap female labor from third world countries, from poorer countries, or even, from Romania. And that happens in Greece as well. I know the situation in Italy, we have it in Germany. Every country has that kind of structure. And that's also a kind of exploitation of women's work that is not acceptable. And it's socially not, holistically, it's not sustainable. So when we think about redefining GDP, let's think about how to define labor. And when you give women the time to make their choices, the time to participate in politics, because doing all that care work, they often don't have the time to go into politics, to go into those decision-making bodies. Women can be a huge success factor in the Green Deal. And this needs to be done now, because what I'm witnessing at European level is this is not taken into consideration at all. I already mentioned Next Generation EU. We are seeing the first data from Italy, the official gender impact assessment by the Italian Ministry of Economic Affairs says 80% of Next Generation EU money is going to male-dominated sectors. So that's not going to create sustainable growth when we know that 70% of the jobs that have been lost were women's jobs in Italy. And this is particularly true in countries where the women's employment rate is already low. For Italy and Greece, I think, are the lowest in Europe. So we are basically going against what we know in terms of economic knowledge in order to give money to male-dominated sectors. We go against our own wisdom, knowing that we would create more jobs. We saw the same thing in the Just Transition Fund. The previous speaker mentioned Just Transition, for example, as lignite is concerned. This is something that concerns me very personally, because I come from a region, from the Rhineland region, where we still have huge lignite mines that have to be closed. And now my government has taken the commitment to close them before 2030. So we experienced that kind of structural change. And when I negotiated the finance package for Just Transition Fund, I was told by a high official in the European Commission, well, I mean, minus jobs are men's jobs. It's obviously that we have to give the money to men. But this totally ignores that a green transition in that region will not happen if we create other jobs for men. We had that experience in Saxony, an Eastern German region, where this was done in the 90s and the early 2000s. And there, all the investment went to strongly male-dominated sectors, very technological sectors, without any measures to get women into the sectors. I'm not advocating to only giving money to female-dominated sectors. What I'm advocating for is mixing up the gender mix in all sectors, in all economic sectors, get more men into care work, get more women into technology, into energy, into transport, and it'll work out fine. And what happened in Saxony is that the young and strongly educated women simply left the region. And that region is socially very difficult today because men don't even find women to marry. It's sort of like a China situation. It's really crazy because the investment—
Excuse me?
Yes.
May I kindly ask you to come to a conclusion? Sorry about the interruption.
Very happy to do that. Yeah. So women are— there's no contradiction between having a green transition, a Green Deal, and gender equality. The two have to go together, and women are an absolutely key success factor in the green transition. Thank you very much.
That's a clear message. Thank you very much. Επιστρέφω στα ελληνικά. Νομίζω ότι ήταν μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα παρουσίαση από την κυρία Γκίζε, ειδικά σε ένα πλαίσιο όπως το ελληνικό.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting presentation by Mrs. Geese, especially for a country like ours, who's amongst the last positions in the Equality Index published in Brussels. So all of these issues are not being discussed in the Greek public dialogue. And in order to have a holistic and stronger European Green Deal, we need more gender equality, better representation of women, gender budgeting in all the steps, and of course, the assessment of the impact of all programs under Next Generation EU or under all other funding tools as well. And of course, she has also said that holistic sustainability should not be seen only in terms of GDP, but we should also look at the future of care work that is provided by women on very unfavorable terms and is not taken into consideration. So I would like to thank both speakers very much for taking part in this first session of our meeting. We have tried to talk about the main points of the European Green Deal for everyone. I think we have a broad picture now, and I would like to ask the rest of our speakers to take part in this discussion with questions if they would like towards Mrs. Doussis or Mrs. Geese. I don't have questions on the chat yet coming from YouTube, so maybe I could start with a couple of questions so that we can warm up. We have quite some time, about half an hour for this session, which is quite positive, I would say. So all of you watching us on Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube or on our Facebook event, you can also ask questions. And so I would like to ask a first question to Mrs. Doussis on the role of governance, because it is clear, I think, that we need to have a good collaboration at all levels for a good outcome. So my question is whether you think at the level of member states, and especially for Greece, we need changes regarding the governance model in order to implement the European Green Deal and so that we can achieve its objectives. Thank you for this very good question. I think that, yes, the implementation of the Green Deal and all these huge changes requires new ways of governance and new tools at European, at national, and at a local level, new types of partnerships within member states, and as I said, at local level as well, so that we can implement all these changes. On this occasion, I want to comment on the new climate law that is being prepared in Greece right now, and the system of governance that is being provided and foreseen is quite centralized, although it should have been much more decentralized. Of course, this law is in the consultation process, and there are targets and plans for emission reduction, etc. But it is quite a complicated system, and that provides for many bodies that will be established that haven't been tested in practice yet to implement all of that in a very centralized way. And I think that the European Green Deal reminds us of this motto of think globally, act locally. And regarding mitigation measures, things are a bit different, but as far as adaptation is concerned, we definitely need a local action, because at national level, we cannot plan the adaptation strategies. That requires a far greater collaboration amongst the different stakeholders at local level as well, to address adaptation that is of greater concern for us in Greece compared to mitigation. So the local self-government should be more involved, of course, in Greece, and be less dependent on the central government. So another question for you from somebody on YouTube. You have talked about fossil fuel from other sources. And of course, we cannot talk about policies that aim at limiting energy and not the replacement of energy sources. Can you comment on that? That's multiple questions that are being raised here. I just presented the main concern on how to replace the energy produced by lignite. I would like to talk about our ongoing dependence on fossil fuel, and we need to see how we will release ourselves from fossil fuel. But I think that for many, many years to come, they will be around. Fossil fuel will be around. And I also talked about this thorny issue of what happens with the national plan for mining, because this is an issue that is not being discussed at all. And this is something that's not logical, I would say. And right now, we are heading towards climate neutrality, and we are discussing the mining plan. Spain did that in the climate law. They prohibited all new forms of mining, and maybe we should do that in our climate law. Of course, I could talk for hours on this. Obviously, mining is a key word. We're talking about fossil gas, and in the public debate, it is called natural gas, and this is a bit misleading. And this is why I talked about fossil gas and not natural gas, as many people are using the term. So yes, perhaps this is being used deliberately in Greece, natural gas. So I would like to ask a question to Mrs. Geese. You have talked about the concept of gender budgeting and how difficult it is to implement it in practice. And I would like to ask you if you could give us a positive example of an implementation of this, and what are the key principles for correctly implementing gender budgeting at local level or at national level?
Yes, thank you. I think there are many examples, a lot on local level. City of Munich, for example, City of Berlin, Sweden does a lot of gender budgeting. That's a place to go and look at. Iceland. Out of the European Union, Italy has a lot of small projects, especially on local level. The problem is what they often do is the analysis part. So they analyze the situation and they find out what they want to do, and then you need to shift the money. You know, it's not, I mean, it's not a question only of knowing things. You have to know them before you act. But then the power question comes in, because obviously shifting money from some kind, for example, giving money to some kind of companies to other kinds of companies, that means you're taking some money away from some people, and those people are usually quite influential in politics, and they're usually male. So if you have a strong male majority in a city council, it's going to be difficult. And the same thing is true for government. You know, women, even with governments who have quite a lot of women ministers, they usually don't hold the financial affairs ministry and the economic affairs. So my advice would be, do it. There are international standards, there are standards on how to do gender budgeting. It's to just go and read them. It's quite easy, but then you really need to be ready to do it and to start shifting some money. And I think there's a very interesting process that's coming to all European countries, because what we did get in the multi-annual financial framework, which is a complicated term to say the 7-year budget of the European Union, that has just started, but we negotiated it obviously a couple of years ago. We have a provision that says the European Commission needs to introduce tracking of gender tracking. So it doesn't need to shift the money yet, because we didn't have a political consensus for that, but it needs to show whether the money goes to men or to women, to say it very bluntly. It's obviously a little bit more complicated than that, but to say it very bluntly. And that's a very interesting start, because at least you can see it. And while when I started talking to them, they said, well, you know, we're going to look at Erasmus, and then we are going to look at the Rights and Value program, which is a very small program where already a lot of money goes to women, but it's an extremely small program. And I said, well, you need to go and look at the structural funds. You know, you need to look at agriculture. That's 80% of the budget taken together. This is where you need to look at. And now this is what they're doing. And the general director of the budget told me, well, Ms. Geese, you're going to be surprised when you see the results. And so like, no, you're going to be surprised, because I can imagine what the results are. So once you have the numbers, you know, this is why you need good monitoring. Once you have the numbers, I think you can use them really for the political fight. But then you need to have enough women being represented in the decision-making bodies in order to push that through. Because in Italy, for example, and also in Germany, it usually stops at the analysis part. And then it's difficult to take a step further, because then you need a political majority to do that. Yeah, so I think it's going to be very interesting, because the Commission is starting with the funds under direct management, so where the Commission can directly make choices. And the idea is then, once they have the methodology, to roll it out to the shared management. That is money that goes to European regions, and a lot of it goes to Greece as well. So at a certain point, there will be the request by the European Commission, could you please give us the data in order for us to be able to do the gender tracking? And I think that would be a very interesting moment for Greece, but also for Germany. It's not that the situation in Germany is better. To realize what they could do and how much better they could fare if these funds were invested more equally in all genders.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Σίγουρα είναι θέμα πολιτικής βούλησης.
Of course, it is a matter of political will, as you said, to a large extent. And you have talked about monitoring and tracking, which is very important, of the measures that are being implemented. And it will be very interesting to look at those results. and how resources are being channeled. A question for Mrs. Doussis, but I think you can both answer this if you would like to. So, to what extent do member states take into consideration the concept of resilience? So should resilience be included? Of course, resilience is included in the national recovery and resilience plans, but is this really happening? What is the concept of resilience and how is it implemented? Thank you for this excellent question. I have stressed in my presentation, in my initial presentation, I have talked about the concept of resilience and its importance. And I think that there are many readings here as well regarding the significance of resilience. As I see it, resilience does not mean only recovery from some sudden shocks or phenomena or heat waves and flooding, etc. It's a greater concept. Recovery and resilience means ensuring long-term sustainability as well. And here we need to place emphasis on prevention. Primarily, prevention can actually help us prevent not ready and are not prepared to coordinate and to protect themselves. And of course, we need to look at that level as well. So it's not just buying more fire extinguishing equipment. It is also a question of organization and coordination at social level, to have escape routes in the cities, to have areas where people can gather and concentrate in case there is an emergency. And I think that the local level here is the cornerstone for adapting and for resilience. So the role of the local self-government is vital here. And to come back to your main question, I think that we don't place such emphasis on the concept of resilience, at least here. I think that we only look at the first reading of resilience, which has to do with recovery from sudden shocks. But there is a broader concept here that obviously needs to be taken into consideration to prevent the next shocks. And of course, we need long-term sustainability. Mrs. Geese, would you like to add something to this? Also taking into consideration digital technology and new technologies and how they could play a role in all of this.
Yeah, I would like to first of all go back to the initial question on resilience. We haven't seen that many measures in the national plans, but I haven't read every plan. I've seen the analysis that the European Commission has been doing, and I think what could go under resilience are the reforms, and the reforms are a strong element of the recovery and the resilience plans. For example, fiscal reforms in order to make sure we can spend enough money, for example, on the staff, on hospital staff, on the people doing the care work, because what we are seeing right now, for example, in Germany, I don't know about Greece, that we do have the physical infrastructure, we do have the hospital beds, being Germany a country that heavily invests in technology, but we don't have the staff, we don't have the people. Because people are burnt out, they're dropping out of the sector. Nobody wants to work in hospitals anymore because they have been sustaining such a terrible burden the past 2 years. They just can't take it anymore, and they're looking for other jobs. And there, a problem with with Next Generation EU is that it's only once-off expenditure. You can't use it, obviously, for recurrent expenditure, and we know that people who work are recurrent expenditure, so that is a little bit a limit. There is quite some investment in hospitals, in schools, but a lot of it goes into the building part, into the infrastructure part. So that is important. I mean, not criticizing it, but what do we do with the people? There is some investment, but little compared to the rest in, for example, students who have to catch up because they were out of school, because of staying home and so on. during the crisis for a long time, but compared to the rest, it's not that much. I think it's still, it's a new way of thinking, and we still have to figure out what does resilience really mean, and how can we change as a society in order to make it happen, because it's not only about physical infrastructure, it's also about people having the qualification, the ability, but also the time to help each other and to react in a very flexible way to a crisis. I think we have a lot more to learn there. In terms of digital technologies, it's complicated, because on the one hand, digital technologies can obviously be a great help. I think only about the communication network. On the other hand, it has been quite neglected that in case of disaster, physical, the kind of disasters that are coming and that we know will increasingly come because of climate change. And I live in an area 30 kilometers from here, from where I'm sitting right now. There was the big flood disaster in July. And there were entire villages that were completely cut off the electricity net, of the phone grid for a week or so in the center of Europe, in a highly industrialized area. And I think that for Germans was really a totally shocking experience. So we need to be sure that the more we focus on digital technologies, especially for our communication, for our hospital and so on, we are resilient. And in the digital era, resilience really means redundance. Have a security net, have a backup networks that works without electricity. In that case, unfortunately, with diesel generators, very old technology, very polluting technology. But that is what security means in that case. So we really have this redundance, and not think, well, digital is going to solve it all, because it will not. It's an important instrument, but it's not a solution.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Θα θέσω ένα τελευταίο ερώτημα στην κυρία Δούση.
Thank you. Last question for Mrs. Doussis, who needs to retire soon. We have a question for you from Mrs. Korodesi. How easy it is to organize socially, and the question is that it is very easy, and we've seen this through the pandemic. We have seen that it is very easy to have the establishment of groups that refuse social organization. I don't have a clear answer, and it's not easy, but we need to start from somewhere. And of course, we don't have in Greece a tradition, I would say, in this kind of social organization, but we need to start from somewhere, and this is urgent now. Thank you very much. Thank you. So thank you for this message. Of course, we need to start from somewhere. And I would like to ask the last question to Mrs. Geese. We are talking about the Green Deal for everybody. And we have talked about different dimensions of the Green Deal, and I would like to add another to the spatial dimension and the age dimension. And we have seen in the EU with Brexit, we have seen clearly the gap that could be created between the large urban centers and the periphery of Europe, and this huge transition for the European deal will affect those who are close to retirement, who will need to upskill or reskill, who will need to learn new skills, and this will also affect the career orientations of younger generations. So could you please comment on these two dimensions, the spatial dimension and the age dimension, and how we can indeed ensure that the regions, the outer regions of Europe will not lag behind, and how both younger and older people can be able to, will be able to take on this huge challenge?
Yeah, thank you for that important question. The space question, I think, in terms of Next Generation EU, which is the big investment we are making right now as European Union, it's quite a lot up to national governments, actually, because I'm not an expert on Greece, so maybe you can discuss that later, but I follow Italy very closely, and what happened there was very interesting because actually the poorer regions are in the south of Italy, which probably have some kind of economy that is similar to the Greek one, a lot of tourism, very hot climate. So the ones are most affected by climate change as well, that will have huge impact on agriculture, for example, in the next 20 years. And the Italian government chose to invest heavily in the north. And that is the risk that we have if we don't look at holistic sustainability, but we look only to it from an industrial point of view, because obviously where you can place investment is where you already have in the industry in place, where you have huge companies that are able to invest that money. And that happens when you have very centralistic choices just made by a national government in cooperation with, in the case of Italy, a lot of public owned companies as well, but also big private companies, because they will obviously privilege territory where they're already present. This is the same problem we have with research investment, that the money usually goes to those countries who have great research facilities, who have advanced universities, and not necessarily those areas which would need the investment most. So I think this is something where we really need to think about. And we did that as Greens in the Just Transition Fund. We fought very strongly for making sure that the poorer regions would get particular considerations and would be more considered, so that being a poorer region would be a factor in order to get more money, and not only to be a transition region. Because where I come from, for example, in Germany, we have two big transition regions, and one really needs the money and the other one doesn't, because it does have a lot of economic development on its own. So we need to have some kind of distribution mechanism that takes that into account. That said, especially the energy transition, I mean, it's a great chance for a country like Greece, because think only about photovoltaics. I mean, just put photovoltaic panels on every roof and you probably solve the energy issue and energy poverty in Greece altogether. So that's, I think it's up to a national government. In terms of age, that is an interesting question, because from my point of view, I see it more as the young people being disadvantaged, because actually my generation and older are the people who, you know, have their jobs, have their pensions, have benefited from a rather positive economic environment. Maybe in Greece that's a little bit less true than in Germany, I acknowledge that. While the younger generation is not only the victim of climate change, because they will have to live in a world that is 2 degrees hotter than ours, or than the one of 20 years ago. And they also are most hit by the economic crisis that will follow if we don't get the transition right. And they are most hit also by the COVID crisis, by the economic part of the COVID crisis. So yeah, upskilling is important, but as I said, I think we need to look at not only getting jobs for exactly the same people, but we need to look at a sustainable but holistic development of the whole region concerned, taking into account everybody, taking account of the younger generation, taking into account the women, because that will create the kind of environment in which everybody will thrive in the end.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ και νομίζω ότι καταλήγουμε εύλογα στον τίτλο που τους ή άλλως είχαμε δώσει.
Thank you very much for these comments. We have indeed talked about how a European Green Deal should involve everybody. I think that we have touched upon many of the dimensions: the environmental, the gender dimension, the governance dimension, the age and spatial dimensions. So it is indeed a huge challenge ahead, a big process that will take years, but it is important to start working on the right path. So with the help of Mrs. Doussis and Mrs. Geese, I think that we have taken a first step on this path, and I do hope that we will be able to discuss with you in the future as well. I would like to thank you very much for your participation. So we are now concluding the first part of our event, and I think that we have mentioned many things that could also inform our discussions in the second part. And our title for the second part of our event is a Green Deal for Greece. So how can we adapt the provisions of the Green Deal to the Greek framework? What are the sectors that are posing the greatest challenges? What are the measures that have been taken or should be taken immediately? And we will try to create this puzzle with an excellent panel. And I will start with Mrs. Athena Dimou, who is a physicist from the University of Patras. He has a master's degree in the management of industrial systems and energy management and environmental systems from Metsovia and Piraeus University. She has taken part in more than 30 national and European projects, implementing actions and projects relating to energy. And since January 2018, she works with the director and president of the National Observatory of Athens, and she's responsible for dissemination and networking of a flagship action of the General Directorate for Innovation. And this is a project that is being coordinated by the National Observatory of Athens. Mrs. Dimou will try to give us the social dimension of the Green Deal and talk to us about the key points for inclusive policies, both at European and national level, and the road ahead for Greece. Mrs. Dimou, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Good evening from me as well. As said before by the previous speakers of the previous panel, tackling climate change is something that needs networking and collaboration among all involved institutions in research, in policy, in society, local governance, and so on. The National Observatory of Athens has been playing a very important role in research, in connecting research centers and universities, and also coordinating actions such as the National Network for Climate Change that has been mentioned and will be developed in continuation. But also we have launched different actions that will start soon and that will be financed by the Recovery Fund and by the European Investment Mechanism. I will present a speech referring to the need to connect research with decision-making centers in order to tackle the environmental crisis. I will mention some good practices, some good examples of collaboration on national and international level. Please change my slide. Thank you. As we know, the research centers of this country have developed different innovative tools in order to tackle natural disasters, to adjust to climate change. I would like to mention some of these examples of these tools, some examples of good collaborations. The two first I would like to mention are these services that are developed here at the National Observatory of Athens, the FADHAM service that is for observing and tackling wildfires, which has been developed by the operational unit beyond of the Observatory of Athens and is provided to the fire brigade. Another good example of successful collaboration between research and state is the prevention tool in order to estimate the wildfire expansion in Greece, the IRIS program that has been developed by the operational unit and has been financed by European programs and has been used by the fire brigade as well. We have different prognostic models that show bioclimate measurements for buildings and are used to give feedback to a system. which is in collaboration with the Aristoteles University of Thessaloniki, is financed by the LIFE program. We have different tools that are measuring pollution from human-centered activities. And this is in collaboration with the University of Crete. We are supporting the EVIA regional governance for the development of this area. And of course, we have many different additional projects and good collaborations between research centers and the universities of these countries, in which governmental institutions are also participating. Many of these tools could have been harnessed by the state and by decision-making centers. However, after completing the financing procedure, they stay without being used. One of the reasons is that they don't seem to be financially affordable. Usually we see that the funding cannot be continued. Often we don't have good interconnection of the research results with the public sector. There is a gap in this sector. Please change my slide. And this is one of the reasons that we don't see the promotion of these programs. We know that research outcomes are not being harnessed enough by the decision-making centers of this country. We see that there is an obligation of the operational units to use these research tools that have been assessed as positive tools by scientists. It is necessary in order to have an effective interconnection between research and decision-making centers to activate a framework of collaboration for this mechanism, and this is not the case yet. There is this legislation about political protection, about crisis management, restructuring of the General Secretary of Political Protection, and through this legal framework, we try to promote the involvement of all institutions in tackling natural disasters. And of course, we aspire for the collaboration of government institutions and researchers. This legislation says that sets the framework of collaboration between these organizations, given that scientific knowledge, scientific outcomes must be harnessed by the government. And this is set by this law. This law also provides for the collaboration, for the participation of scientists and research directors in decision-making centers. And we see that these collaborations are being promoted, collaborations between academics, between scholars and researchers. The General Secretary of Political Protection, that is now a ministry, is planning the national policy to reduce the risk of natural disaster. This is a 6-year plan, and this also has to embed researchers and academics from this country. So we have a new law. And sets the collaboration between scientists and the government as an imperative in order to harness all tools of innovation, of research, of applied scientific knowledge. So we have to implement this law, we have to implement this framework in order to achieve this synergy between academy, between the research and the state. This could bring us more protection, more safety for our societies. I would like to mention some good examples of collaboration on a local and regional level. These are collaborations between research institutions, but also between research institutions and the government. The first action is about the National Network on Climate Change. This is a complementary action of the General Secretary of Innovation and Research and has started 4 years ago in 2017 when the president of the National Observatory of Athens took the initiative and said that we need an action on a national level that will try to gather the entire know-how we have in our research centers to develop it further. So this initiative was heard from the government, and we start the implementation of this program. And it was signed in October 2019. This is one of the good practices. We started an action with one government. It was set forth with another government, so we can see that it is common knowledge that such actions should be continued. So this action started in 2019. The National Network for Climate Change started with 11 institutions. The National Observatory of Athens, that is the coordinator of this action, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, the Athens Academy, the Maritime Research Center of Athens, the National Kapodistrian University of Athens, the National Center of Demokritos, the University of Crete, the Research Center Athena. And it started by gathering the biggest universities and research centers of the country. And while implementing this project, we set the requirement through an institutionalized process to enable other institutions to enter this network as well. We have already accepted the Greek agricultural organization, Dimitra, the Agricultural University of Athens in our network, and we have received applications from other institutions and universities as well. So what are the goals? What is the purpose of this network? On one hand, we want to optimize the existing climate procedures and tackling procedures for natural disasters. So we want to gather the know-how of this country from the most possible organizations and create a new database, a new national database by documenting all the environmental factors from different platforms, from different stations, to create a core of scientific excellence by supporting innovative methods in order to reduce insecurities of environmental models, and of course to timely inform decision-making centers and policy-making centers to protect the society against the impact of climate change. So we have emphasized tourism, agriculture, forests, political protection, environmental pollution, the ocean, and so on. These are emphasized in our program. Could you please conclude? Thank you very much. This action is taking place throughout 24 months. Throughout these 24 months, we have forums, we have fora, we have dialogues with different institutions to expand our discussion and to create new channels of know-how exchange, of information exchange, and so on. However, since the Mediterranean is affected greatly due to climate change, it is important beyond national actions to have actions on a regional level. So regional collaboration in political protection is very important. So we need actions that can bring neighboring countries more close. And these actions need an operative and academic circle that will give feedback to each other. A new important infrastructure in this context is the launching of a new program of the National Observatory of Athens to reduce and prevent natural disasters, and this is being funded by the Recovery Fund. This new infrastructure, Geese, will harness this huge network of the observatory, will provide satellite information and provide access to scientific excellence and also to different institutions and organizations. We are expecting to have different benefits. I cannot mention them all due to time limitation, but in this way we can limit competitiveness between academic staff. This new infrastructure can grant access to different installations, to different laboratories in order to promote innovation. It will have great benefits for the society, and it's expected to contribute to the decrease of brain drain towards other countries. Another important action that aims to achieve regional collaboration and adjustment to environmental change is the signature of a memorandum of collaboration. This is a collaboration that started between the observatory, between the National Kapodistrian University and the Institute of Cyprus. This is a very important collaboration, a landmark collaboration that tries to reduce wildfires and tries to set the ways to tackle wildfires in Greece and Cyprus. We want to create a framework of national collaboration that will include different organizations who have knowledge about the efficient tackling of wildfires. It will try to interconnect the competent authorities in these matters and try to provide these information, these services to all countries of the Mediterranean in the context of national initiatives. So this is the action of the National Observatory of Athens. So we're trying to interconnect, as said before, research, academic institutions with the government for the benefit of the society. Thank you very much for your very informative presentation regarding your actions at the National Observatory of Athens. I think This is a problem that we face in many countries, that once funding has been completed, many projects are not being continued. So we have to see how these can be further implemented. But I think CLIMPACT is a very good example, as well as what you said, that we need to see beyond parties and see the great interconnection that is needed in this direction. And I wanted to emphasize that, as we heard before, it is not enough to have national efforts, but we need collaboration on our regional level. And I think this is very important in our neighborhood in the Mediterranean. I think this is a great challenge. We will proceed with the second intervention of this panel. I would like to remind you that we would like to hear your comments and questions. You can ask your questions on YouTube or on the Facebook event. We will continue with Mr. Vlassis Oikonomou, who is the Managing Director of the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. He's collaborating with many countries in the EU as an economist. He is participating in more than 25 EU-funded projects. He has written many books and many articles, and he has been very active in energy efficiency policy issues on all EU member states. And he has also worked at the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands and at the University of Utrecht and the University of Groningen. He will talk about the importance of energy efficiency and about heating decarbonization in Greece. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you very much for this introduction and congratulations on this event. In the context of our work, we are seeing how European states are implementing energy efficiency directives and policies for buildings and other sectors of the economy, and we propose solutions to the European Commission and other stakeholders in line with the Fit for 55 package and energy efficiency directive. So why have we chosen today to talk about decarbonization of heating? The decarbonization of heating, as has been said in previous speeches in relation to green transition, is one of the most difficult aspects. It has to do with both the sustainability of fossil fuel, and it has to do with building refurbishments and, of course, energy poverty. So we realize that this is a multidimensional issue. It's not just a simple solution that we want an X rate of kilowatt hours, etc. So we need to see how to address this in Greece as well. If we look at the figures, in a building, about 65% of its energy use concerns heating, and 15% warm water, hot water. So that's a large rate of the consumption. In an average European household, 43% of that energy comes from natural gas or fossil gas, as we said before. So why is it difficult to find good solutions? Because heating systems vary greatly across Europe, and prices vary greatly. And I would say the average is 70 per kilowatt hour, 70 euros per kilowatt hour, and it's increasing. And for heating, we had different rates in different countries on the rise as well. And we have different performance of heating in every country. So there is one single rule. And we could say that we're going to do this in Europe and that's it. We know also that 40% of carbon dioxide emissions comes from buildings, and the largest part comes from heating of the buildings, and of course, due to oil and natural gas. This, in general, is what is happening so that we can have an idea why decarbonization of heating in buildings is important. I would like to say, and to link with what we said before, citizens both in Greece and in Europe are very well aware of this. We carried out a study that was presented in various journals and showed that 80% are fully aware of climate policy even before the fires. If we compare in Greece as well, we have also seen that natural gas is considered problematic for the environment by many, and a shorter percentage talked about renewable sources of energy. So although there is the tendency in the Greek population to know that fossil gas is harmful for the environment, then 75% are saying that they don't know much about the energy planning in Greece, according to our surveys. And we see many times that in these national plans, such as the National Plan for Energy and Climate, and consultations are based on co-creation much more in Europe than in Greece. So why are we interested in this? Because we have to address the issue of time. We don't have much time for achieving decarbonization. We cannot wait because we have an energy crisis that we all see. It's not something temporary or something that will stop. Mr. Oikonomou, if you could just talk a little bit slower so that the interpreters can follow. Thank you. So the energy crisis is here to stay. It's not something temporary. And of course, inflationary pressures may decrease, but we will have higher prices in fossil fuel. And this was one of the baseline scenarios of the European Commission even before the energy crisis. Now, in the context of decarbonization, the European Commission has proposed in the Fit for 50 package that has shocked society because these are new measures that the states didn't expect. So they have proposed a policy framework that will accelerate decarbonization of heating. We talk about a decrease in the use of fossil fuel, as in the national plan as well. And with the new policies, this decarbonization, this decrease in the rate of natural gas and fossil fuel in general, will be accelerated. So the first policy package comes with the new law on the energy efficiency of buildings, and a lot has been said and a lot has been discussed on the role of the tenants and the owners and mandatory changes, etc. And we have reached the point that there will be some minimum energy efficiency standards. Not ideal, but this is an effort to bridge the gap that we have had up till now. What are the main key points of this directive? So there will no longer be financing for replacing fossil fuel. That's important. So we cannot have a public budget for replacing fossil fuels between them. And also this and all buildings need to follow a road of energy upgrading. We also have the phasing out of natural gas burners, and this may be in contrast with the Greek climate law that talks only about natural gas. Talks only about oil. and not for natural gas as well, as provided for in the directive. And from 2025 onwards, we cannot sell any new burners, and from 2030, existing burners will be phased out. This means that there will be no depreciation of a new burner if it is introduced now. And also another policy measure that is the hardest one and the most market-based, I would say, is the parallel emissions system, greenhouse gas emission system for cooling and heating in buildings. For every fuel that emits carbon dioxide and comes into our house for cooling and heating, we will need to have licenses and permits from 50 euros per ton to 200. We don't know how this will evolve. Everybody was hoping for a low price, but now we have an initial price rate of 50 euros. And if the initiatives for Fit for 55 package commence and are concluded soon, then we need to act very, very quickly and be ready for all these changes. In the Greek reality, we have the climate law, which, as we have said, has very little on energy efficiency and the concept of natural gas. And it's very difficult to talk about the transition of a fuel that has an end date. So we have the climate law, we have a regime in place since 2017 that needs to be used even more, and this regards the energy efficiency obligations. And what is this? These are specific targets for the providers of final energy, all sorts of energy, to implement energy saving actions for their end consumers. And up till now, we have had behavioral measures, but now we are entering technical measures. So they will have the obligation and they will need to implement some interventions in the buildings or take some other technical measures. And the next development of this will be the auctions. This is a process for aggregating energy savings in buildings to achieve savings. So Greece right now has the regimes that have been in place for years, and the classical scheme, the classical plan is saving that we have had for years, and now we have had quite a few improvements. And of course, there are many problems as well, because this scheme is again subsidizing natural gas. So whether you're doing a clean investment or fossil fuel, you get the same outcome. So Greece is subsidizing directly and indirectly fossil fuels. So there is an indirect competition towards renewable energy sources. All of this comes under the energy efficiency first principle. What does this principle say? That for every investment that we want to make in demand for demand regarding new pipelines for natural gas or new electricity networks, we need to have a social cost benefit analysis and see if the financing would go towards demand for building refurbishment, if that investment would be more efficient, then it is not justified to give investments for a supply. And the European Commission issued an interesting guidance, a technical guide on climate proofing of all investments from 2021 to 2030, setting very strict conditions on the green and red light of investments regarding climate proofing, including energy efficiency as one of the criteria. Of course, all of this will be valid from 2021 to 2030. So all new designs, even in the recovery plan, in theory, all the new plans based on what has been voted by the European Commission should come under these rules. Of course, Greece has thought of something smarter, and they're using, and not only Greece, other countries, they're using money from the previous programming periods to finance actions which, based on the new framework, would not be eligible, such as extending the pipelines. They're using the previous programming period money to finance later phases of that project. If you could please conclude your presentation. So we have in Greece energy poverty at growing at an increasing rate. We have energy policies that are policies of subsidizing fossil fuel that will reach 1 billion. So if we do a cost-benefit analysis on the long term, we will see that these subsidies are not leading anywhere, and we could have much better interventions and energy-saving interventions for buildings that would not create problems of state aid as we have now with the European Commission. And let us not forget that the program, the previous program, talked about energy efficiency and ambitious targets, and not giving, not funding fossil fuel with 1 billion. So the fund, so Greece should have an energy efficiency fund. This is provided for in the energy efficiency directive, and this would give a revolving fund that would allow us to make investments because just saving is very inadequate. We need more targeted actions. So, and just two final points. In the calculations that we will carry out on what needs to be done about energy efficiency in the funds, we always need to take into account the multiple effects of energy efficiency and the revenue streams, and we should also take into account well-being and other aspects, and the problem where the problem about who's going to do the investment, the tenant of the landlord. And we should not forget that the Electricity Authority of Greece has openly expressed its view, and this is a message for everybody, that there is no that it is no logical to invest in fossil fuel, and of course the future has to do with other sources and heat pumps. Thank you. Thank you. We also have questions in the chat, and I think we will have a lot to discuss. Thank you for all these interesting points that you have raised on the importance of time. Also, you have talked about the European legislation and where we stand currently in Greece. So you have said that the climate law is inadequate and saving is inadequate regarding the plans for the future. And we have a question about whether we are reaching a dead end with subsidizing fossil fuel, or whether we need to carry out more energy efficiency measures. And we will have more questions for you after the end of the next presentations. And now we move on to Mr. Chrysogelos, who will talk to us about the realities of our neighborhoods. He will talk to us about the green growth in cities, and he will talk to us at the level of the city, at the level of the neighborhood. And if you haven't met Nikos, He's a chemical engineer, environmentalist, with significant experience in these issues, education, also in terms of the environment. He has been a representative of the Green Party, and he has been a member of the European Parliament with the Greens in the period 2012-2014. He's a member of the Council of the New Greens and a member of our co-organizers, Wind of Renewal. Thank you.
After so many different topics we've heard, I will try to give a continuation to all that has been said, but bearing in mind that everything that has been said regarding social justice, gender issues, and all interesting things that were mentioned by Mr. Vlassis Oikonomou, we are in an era where we are experiencing different parallel crises, and we must bear this in mind. A couple of years ago, we might have been talking about some of these crises, but we cannot separate them anymore because we see that climate and financial crises are connected. We see the environmental issues, we see pollution in our cities, we see the increasing social injustice that affects people, affects behaviors. We have a financial model crisis because we see the accumulation of wealth in small elite groups, whereas a great percentage of the society is facing difficult problems to survive. We see unemployment, we see income poverty. So let's keep in mind Green Deal, this notion of Green Deal for all, and we have to interconnect the solution for all these different themes, for all these topics in a more comprehensive way that in comparison to what we have been doing until today. So we have to compact the issue of energy poverty, and we must understand that we need measures that help us create new job positions. And as Vlassis said before, we might have 1 billion euros in Greece to promote the consumption of fossil fuels or oil, but it would be much more important on the long term to invest more in a more flexible matter, to save energy in a way that will be more efficient socially and that will be based on social innovation. So what we must see is to have a change of paradigm. There are separate policies. There were several policies in the past referring to this issue, but they did not refer drastically to this enormous problem. We've seen that many billion euros have been invested in tackling the energy poverty issue, and we see that this issue is increasing. So there is a very big problem in the operation of these measures. What we've been experiencing is that what seemed to be a solution to tackle energy prices, so embedding or providing money through the budget to households who cannot pay their bills of electricity or other fossil fuels, it's not something that happened due to this sudden crisis. This is a fixed policy that has been taking place for many years. We've heard many critiques against these policies, but they were not taken into consideration to improve energy efficiency. We have some programs such as the saving program, but they have not achieved the qualitative and quantitative results we would wish for. And at the same time, we see that we are farthering, we are expanding the fossil fuels network from the 2014-2020 period, but these are strategies that should have boosted the energy efficiency program and should have led to renewable energy systems, especially in our urban centers. So I will try to summarize what has been heard on a geographical level, on an urban level, so to see how all these big strategies that should be promoted to protect the climate, to promote energy transition, to promote social cohesion, and to create new jobs, to protect biodiversity and all these nice things we hear in national and EU policies. So how we could change all this into a cohesive policy that can be implemented. This era has a benefit. We don't only have crisis, we have also tools, we have financial tools, we have cognitive, technological, digital tools that can facilitate us in shifting towards a new model rapidly, a model that will combine technological, social, financial, and environmental climate policies in a new way. Therefore, what we can think is a Green Deal on a national level that is connected to recovery and resilience, but not with a number that refers to big investments of the public sector or of big companies, but to investments that involve to a great percentage society itself, so citizens. We're talking about a new economic model. We can think of climate protection on an urban level in a way that will help us to reduce emissions on the spot that they are being produced. So we must see where this energy is consumed, used, where we are consuming fossil fuels through the consumption of energy in our buildings, in our homes, in our households, and so on. And this is something that is happening today and contributes greatly to emissions. So let's think of a strategy for our cities and let's use different tools that are already available. We have Next Generation EU that refers to recovery. We have fundings for the Green Deal. We must understand that these resources must be contributed for biodiversity issues, for recovering biodiversity. We need energy recovery programs to be promoted, but we also need to reform our GDP. What a budget usually tries to do is to promote consumption, to increase the GDP. But as a country, we should promote the reform of our GDP to promote the policies that are important today. So energy efficiency, reducing emissions, recovering biodiversity, reducing social inequalities through structural changes. Let's see this on a urban level. We are experiencing this health crisis today. A part of this crisis refers to health issues. So we're talking about the pandemic, about a disease, about masks and so on. But exactly like other crises involving pandemics and so on, has also a social and financial aspect. We do know that. We know that this virus is affected by socio-economic circumstances, and we have seen many researches, but it is also affected by environmental parameters. Let's not forget that after the first lockdown, we were seeking to find green areas to exercise, to meet people. We are talking about avoiding people, about keeping social distancing. But if we think of it, in our daily life, it is important to create green zones where we can continue our social, our financial activities, but in a natural environment within our cities. So we need cities with nature or solutions that are based on nature. And this need has been strengthened through this pandemic, through this crisis. So we need cities in which people can experience nature, can enjoy nature, even with a pandemic that is airborne, so that people can continue their activities in spaces that are more friendly for their health. And these are major problems of our societies today. Another important issue is the way we move within our cities. We've seen that people are afraid of public transportation right now due to the communication of the disease. And this creates different problems. Of course, this increases pollutions, creates traffic jams, leads to waste of time. Although we've seen in the last years this tendency to create new bicycle pathways. In Paris, we've seen a new model, the city of 15 minutes. This refers to cities in which citizens can reach all services, education, grocery, social interaction spaces within 15 minutes by foot or by bicycle, and where public transportation is used for bigger distances or for other occasions. So we've seen these models of cities, and when we take into consideration the climate crisis, the health crisis, the pollution, we must say that more than 400,000 people die yearly in Europe due to air pollution. So how could we improve all these situations? A solution could be the green reform of cities that will take into consideration housing. We've talked about energy saving, about greenhouses, but we must also go to the level of neighborhoods and of cities. We are talking about cities that will be a network of green zones, of green neighborhoods that produce, store, and exchange their energy on a neighborhood level, so we can reach cities that will not need fossil fuels. I think Vlassis mentioned these facts before, and a model that will connect natural spaces. We have small parks, we have forests which are not connected to our cities due to the way we have created our cities with autobahns, with highways. So we've seen that these spaces are consuming a great part of our cities. Can you please conclude, Nikos? Yes, I'm concluding. Thank you. This reform brings us back to the primary discussion we had. We are not talking about a reform that only requires technical requirements, research, and companies that will implement all these interventions. It also needs a new model of citizen participation in shaping our cities and implementing our investments. So we need to provide citizens with an essential role in investments as well in investments on a neighborhood level, which can happen through cooperative models. We have excellent examples on a European level, land trust programs for buildings, for housing. We have energy communities, energy cooperatives to upgrade buildings and homes. So there are many models that promote the connection of natural spaces, and all these must be concluded in the design of the EU Green Deal, and it is not existent right now. We don't have that in our national plans, nor in the Green Deal. So we're talking about the investments of big companies. So the society believes now that the Green Deal refers to big companies and not to the citizens. But we must say that the reform of the city needs the participation, needs the investment of the citizens. Social economy can play a strategic role. This is something that is said by the European Action Plan. We are not talking only about the social dimensions, about social problems. We're talking about social and ecological transform of all dimensions. And we can launch all these that seem to be visionary, seem to be an utopia. Often people say this sounds good, but how can we implement it? But we can start from our schools. We can think that neighbors, teachers, children can collaborate to create schools where we can produce energy, we can share knowledge, and we can disseminate knowledge, know-how, and good experiences. That was all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nikos. I would like to keep what you said, that we have to interconnect the solutions in all these parallel crises that are taking place in our societies. We need to change our paradigm. And you asked us to think about a city that is transformed through the citizens, connecting natural spaces, but not only based on technical requirements, but through the participation of citizens by taking advantage of all these models that already exist. And I think this is very interesting to discuss about it later today or on another occasion, to discuss this suggestion you made about schools that could be the platforms to start working towards this new transformed cities. Thank you very much. We will proceed with the last but not least important intervention. Before we start our questions and discussion, we have Ms. Mourtzaki, who's Policy Manager of Action Aid Hellas. She has graduated from the Law School of the University of Athens and holds a master's degree on EU law. For the last 10 years, she has been working for civil society organizations at international and national level. She has conducted researches on domestic violence, sexual harassment in the workplace, inclusive education, but also different interventions for advocacy for the rights of refugees and migrants. She is co-chairing the Women's Committee of the Athens Coordination Center for Migrant and Refugee Issues, along with the municipality of Athens. She's particularly focused on the intersectional approach in advancing the rights of refugee and migrant women in Greece, with the aim of participating equally in socio-economic life. During the last 3 years, she's also developing research on the progress made in the realization of SDGs in the Greek context and the gender aspect of climate change. That was part of today's discussions. So she will talk about the social dimension of the European Green Deal, about elements for inclusive policies. Thank you very much for being here, and you have the floor, Mrs. Mourtzaki.
Thank you very much for this invitation, for the opportunity to take part in this very interesting discussion. I am the last speaker for today, so I have listened to everything that has been mentioned, and I will try to avoid some overlappings in my presentation, and I will try to give you a different perspective to what has been mentioned. And please forgive me if there is some repetition and overlapping with what has been presented before. So, as has been said quite a few times this afternoon from the very first presentation by Mrs. Doussis, it is very important to have in mind that the European Green Deal does not only concern climate and the environment, but in order to implement it, we need to seriously take into consideration the social dimension of all the issues that are being affected by its implementation. It has also been mentioned that we are trying to head towards a just green and digital Europe, but this is done with a starting point that's unjust and unequal at national and local level. In other words, not all member states and not all local communities have the same opportunities, the same tools in order to implement these objectives. So we realize that the climate crisis, which is a global phenomenon, and we see that its effects are mostly seen at a local level, and this requires a multifaceted approach to address it. So at this point, I want to introduce the concept of climate justice. We have more or less analyzed this, but we can give a name to it right now. And when we talk about climate justice, we are referring actually to the responsibility of the more powerful states towards the less powerful ones. And this is not self-evident as we see. I would say the contrary, it is not self-evident at all, because there is always a greater effort at decision-making process, at policy making, etc., to convince and make everybody involved understand the social dimension of the climate crisis. We are hearing in the official statements of the President of the European Commission and from people at the decision-making centers that we want a just transition, but we start on an unjust basis, so we don't take into consideration everything that needs to be done. Then this unjust starting point will eventually lead us to an unjust outcome in the end. So an issue I would like to raise at this point, in addition to inequalities in access and access to certain tools at national and local level to implement the policies, is that through the text and the commitments of the Green Deal, we have to a great extent, discretion on the part of the member states to implement the targets. And this is both a blessing and a curse, because member countries are given the opportunity to adapt to everything that needs to be done. But at the same time, we know that not all member states will undertake their responsibilities for reasons having to do with political will, with different socioeconomic data. So this is also a dimension we need to seriously consider before talking about implementing actions, because this will also define the outcome. Last week, the European Commission published the guidance, the policy guidance on the implementation of the Green Deal, which is very important to see that they are requesting for cohesive policies. And for our country, this is very, very important, because we know that one of the main issues faced by the Greek state, the Hellenic state, and the policies it implements is the fragmentation and the fact that policies are not cohesive. We have multiple laws, we have overlappings that could have been avoided with better planning and through many other actions. But if we stress that we need cohesive policies, this is an important step, of course, because we see in practice that the Greek state is not actually implementing this and has not been doing so for years. And just to make a parenthesis here and say that it is quite interesting, but a bit unfortunate that the technical issues that have to do with the incorporation of certain dimensions in the policies could be true for different discussions, and not only this discussion on climate crisis and climate justice. And of course, this extends to other issues as well. So regarding our own perspective, I would say that we have three main issues we would like to look at regarding the policies that our country will implement. We have talked already about the gender dimension in all the practices and policies that will be adopted. The second issue is intersectorality, because the climate crisis is not a unidimensional issue. There are many other factors and matters that need to be taken into consideration, and so that we can try to regulate all of that together. And also, I will try to give you specific examples on how we think that these can be implemented in practice in Greece. Regarding the gender dimension, we believe that the gender dimension should be incorporated into the concept of sustainability. We need to have a transformation in this regard, and also transform our practices and discussions around this concept. The second point is that we need to incorporate the gender dimension in the economy. We want to see more regarding the care economy. Discussion at international level is much more advanced than in our country, but I think that in our context as well, we should promote this discussion and see which of these points we could implement in Greece. And also we have talked about gender budgeting, and I can give you an example from one of the programs implemented by Action Aid in the last year and a half in our center in Athens, in collaboration with the Women's Center in the area of Karditsa. We have been implementing a project on the gender dimension in public budgets. To give you a more practical view of this, we have set up groups with citizens in these areas. For Athens, we are referring to the area of Kolonos, and these citizens have taken the necessary guidance and received training on what gender budgeting means, to put it simply, and then joint actions are being implemented in addition to training on how they can try and collect data and put forward their concerns so that we can introduce changes at local level. So see what's happening in the budget of the municipality of Athens, for example, in the specific area. And based on that, based on these local groups, we can bring about change. So we want to believe that this will be a good example, and this will be one way of implementing what we are discussing at local level with all the features that are necessary and which have been adopted internationally with regard to how to proceed with gender budgeting. So this is one part of the gender dimension that we would like to see included in the whole process and taken into consideration. In the social dimension of the climate crisis, intersectorality has to do with the fact that this is not a unidimensional issue. We need to take into account multiple issues. And as Mr. Chrysogelos has said, we are at a time of multiple crises. And before we can even realize what happened further to experiencing a crisis, a new one comes along with additional burden, with additional characteristics, and at the end of the day, we are called to manage an evolving challenge. So it is important to look at the common features of these crises, see how we can build the resilience of our societies at local level initially, so that we can say that we can have a result and an outcome at national or international level. And Mrs. Doussis talked about this at the beginning, how to think globally and act locally so that we can see the result that we have in mind. So we are trying to connect the crisis between them, taking into account their common traits and also their differences. So I will be brief. Yes. Thank you. Yes. So, and the last thing we would like to raise is the issue of substantial and meaningful consultation that should not be limited to a platform. We need new ways and new efforts of promoting consultation. And of course, we need further research and to see what is the impact of the policies that are being implemented. And we definitely need to constantly update our data and improve our views and our policies. So this is all from me. If I can have 20 more seconds to refer to a project that we have, the climate of change, as we call it. And right now we are running a plea where there is a petition that anyone can sign. The signatures are expected to be handed over to the president of the European Commission next year. And I think you can see the petition on the chat, and we remain at your disposal for anything further on this.
Thank you very much. Touching upon what you've said, we have this discussion on the chat of Zoom. We are sharing information, and we will share this information to the audience as well, to everybody who is attending this event through YouTube. I wanted to thank all of our speakers of the second panel of the discussion. I think it was a good way to complete the first panel, the European Green Deal for All. I think all interventions, all four interventions were very useful. We started with the interconnection of research and academic institutions with the decision-making centers and how we could change our paradigm to have scientific scholars and scientific personnel playing an important role, a vital role in decision-making centers. We talked about the need to decarbonize heating and how this is a difficult part of energy transition. This is a multidimensional issue, and we talked about the European and national legislation. We said how difficult these times are for energy transition. This was the intervention from Mr. Oikonomou, and we talked about the balance between energy savings and not promoting other fossil fuel investments. Then we talked about the need of a green reform of our urban centers based on natural spaces, on neighborhoods, and giving solutions that have in the center nature itself. And we had the last speech of Mrs. Morizaki, who talked about this inequality. She talked about social issues and about the need to have social policies, especially in countries such as Greek, that we see fragmented policies and measures. And you mentioned three basic points of action aid: intersectionality, participation, inclusiveness. And I think these were also mentioned in all interventions of these events. So I try to summarize what we have heard today. We have been talking for about 2.5 hours. We have another half an hour to discuss any issue you want. We have some questions in our chat as well. Let's start with a question from Stefanos Kaladzas. He has two questions to Mr. Oikonomou. I will start with the first question. Who will conduct these researches of cost benefit? So who will be the one who will judge whereas these investments are beneficial? This is a very good question. It's good to explain this in detail and thoroughly. So thank you very much, Mr. Balanza. Based on the direction, the one who is in charge to conduct the research is the regulator. This could be RAI or the region, if the plans will go through their planning, or the energy ministry. In Greece, as said before, this is not in the discussion. Based on how it has been presented, RAE or the regional governance or the Ministry of Energy should be in charge of conducting such a research. I would like to provide an example in a project we are launching now. We are working with regions, and in our regional planning, in 4 or 5 countries we've seen, they have the right to provide the license for a pipeline to go through their area. So these are the people in charge that the social to cost benefit is favorable. So this is affected by the local governance. Here it could be RAE, but we should look into it. His second question, natural gas import has cost us 1.2 trillion euros per year up to this date, and this price is increasing. How can we affect it? He's a very good engineer, and I think the most important thing here is to implement the policies that we have already. We had this policy of tax reduction, but it has not been implemented properly, and we should make savings in our materials. We have to implement this revolving system, this energy efficiency system. We must try new mechanisms. We talked about some mechanisms that are already passed into legislation about emission trading systems, for example. We see that the saving program is not enough. We should expand it. Another solution could be, since we have providers with license, they could also provide services to have more efficient programs. We talked about an efficiency fund. We should also pressure municipalities and regions to contribute to the budget of the saving project. We cannot have a 30% insufficiency in our budgets. So we had a research Peloponnese to see what will happen with natural gas, with heating, and how could this region help 5,000 to 6,000 households to upgrade their energy efficiency. So we need a percentage of all programs that will bring about savings right from tomorrow. We need energy efficiency in poor households. We cannot only talk about public buildings. Thank you very much. So if we want to continue seeing these investments, these subsidies, we are talking about measures that need 2 to 3 years to bring some outcomes. We cannot give flat financing tools everywhere. We need targeted interventions in poor households. These are the places that absorb a big part of the financing that is provided for energy issues. One more question at YouTube to Mrs. Dimou, who has talked about research at the beginning and about academic institutions. Does research promote the prosperity of people and communities? And since this is a given fact, shouldn't the public sector and people be part of these research initiatives? If people are not part of this research, we are talking about a very sterilized process. This is the comment or question. I mentioned about the interconnection of research to government because tools and services that are being developed by research centers right now about prevention, about observation, about documentation of natural disasters can be harnessed by governmental institutions of political protection. Research and many research programs are connected with the citizens, with local communities. And as said very correctly by the gentleman who has raised a question, what is going on? My speech was limited to the connection between research and state and government because there is an insufficiency there, and we must create an interactive mechanism in order to harness the entire know-how that is produced in research centers. That was all from me. Thank you, Mrs. Dimou. I think this common question also refers to the critique that was expressed in all interventions. We talked about the critique to inclusiveness and participation, but I wanted to mention some positive examples that you can refer to. I think we do realize that energy transition in Western Macedonia is taking place in a criminal way, we could say. Are there examples that can be considered positive for the European Green Deal implementation here? Can you name some positive examples from your programs? This question is open for all 4 speakers. Maybe you could start, Mr. Chrysogelos. I would like to mention an example from our collaboration in a program of European Climate Initiative from Germany, where we collaborated. So Greek and German organizations collaborated. We had the municipality of Athens, we had the Wind of Renewal, and the Secretary of Future Studies of the Freie Universität von Berlin. And I think this was a very interesting collaboration that has proven that students can be energy auditors, energy inspectors. We trained educators and they raised awareness among students, and students with their tools ended up being energy inspectors. They observed things and drafted a suggestion regarding how we can intervene to have more energy efficient schools and play an important role in transferring this knowledge to parents. So we've seen like 6,000 programs about environmental education, and we know what's going on in Greek schools. Therefore, we understand that schools could be catalysts, not in the traditional way, but in a way that they could be an open center of knowledge, of implementation, of know-how. But I think we don't have that yet. We have the potential. We've seen good examples. We've seen some examples. We've seen some interventions of teachers. We've seen some courses. We've seen some actions of environmental education, but we must transform this in order to get the society involved, in order to promote the Green Deal or green recovery, and bring about actions that will have also a social dimension along the green dimension. People are now thinking that the Green Deal, and I think this is the way that we have drafted our national recovery resilience plan as well. So this refers to digitalization programs. We will digitalize our highways, for example, to have electric vehicles moving more easy. This is not a negative development for the future, but it would be much more important to create local parks in schools and have a paradigm of inclusive green intervention so that the society can see the outcomes of a Green Deal. So we need digital technologies such as blockchain, we need exchange of knowledge, and we need programs that will function in a way that can be seen by the society in its whole. Many young people have studied something, but they are delivery boys and girls. So we must see this gender issue as well. Women can play a very important role to change our neighborhoods and create new neighborhoods, because we see that we cannot walk in our cities with our strollers. We've seen that during the lockdown, people went out to the streets again, to the parks. So we've seen a context in which we had some measures for distancing, but at the same time, it provided citizens with the space again. And the first trimester was very positive. People were happy, although we had this threat. So we must not forget it. We must bring this in the reform of our cities, and we must also provide resources through recovery funds, through new programming periods, through all these financial tools. And this also involves participation. We have talked about participation. Participation means that you give a vision to the society. They can tell how they envision their city, their streets. And then we can see examples like in Milan, where citizens have transformed their neighborhoods with very low costs. Mrs. Morzaki, you have also mentioned participation as one of the three most important issues of Action Aid. Could you name some positive examples to see beyond what's being talked about on the platform? The most examples that I have in my mind right now are examples from actions that are taking place in our center in Kolonos. So these centers are trying to implement such actions. And I think if we would try to categorize such initiatives, most of them are the result of the implementation of some project, as mentioned by Mr. Chrysogelos right now, but also through the self-organization on a local level. There are initiatives, and this is important, and these initiatives are increasing. We are not lagging behind on with traditional measures. We understand that we need something new and that we cannot use in the same way traditional tools to deal with current crisis. And we see a development in this sector based on the intervention of Mrs. Dimou on interconnecting research with the government. I want to suggest as well that if these initiatives remain on the level of an individual action, or if these initiatives always require people to promote it, we will not have the result we want. So what we need is this connection between research and the field. It was a very important intervention. We must connect the field with policies, with politics. We need to take good policies, good practices, make them into policies and implement these policies on all levels. I'm very happy to hear this from you, because the field is the tools, the services that are developed from research centers and not primary research. What I wanted to add regarding the examples you mentioned, a good example, in my opinion, that is not implemented in this phase, but it should be, is the prevention and the tackling of wildfires, and mostly and not so much the city fires. So to have local communities involved in the implementation of operational planning. Next to the contribution of research with tools, with services to decision-making centers, we also need local communities that know their area, know the particularities of their areas, and they understand that when we need a prevention plan, they must also participate actively. And I think this is very important. So I still wanted to add due also to the wildfires that we have been facing in Greece lately. You talked about co-creation. Mr. Oikonomou, would you like to add something? Especially when we're talking about climate policies in the new period of Fit for 55 and of New Green Deal, we see, based on the titles of this project, that we are talking about citizen engagement, about co-creation, about civil society, and how they can be more involved and more active in this whole procedure. It's very difficult. It's something we have tried in the past. It is very difficult to target this population, especially when we're talking about energy poor populations. We have achieved many things. We had a project in which we've seen these groups of citizens along with providers, with with the tenants, with the owners of buildings, with municipalities, who try to discuss and to see how they can implement a part of the savings programs or of another policy. So they are co-creating national policy about energy sufficiency, and through citizens. It is difficult, it's time-consuming, yes, but you can achieve much more through their participation, because when citizens participate, we will have better negotiations, better talks, and we will have better social acceptance. And this is the most difficult thing when we're talking about problems, about issues. Often we see this problem of not discussing with local institutions, local governments and the citizens. we've done a lot, but we have a long way to go. Michalis, if you could allow me a couple minutes. I think we have a human force that we should harness in participatory issues. We have many people who have studied methodology in discussions on a municipality level, and they're talking about the different issues of environmental training and environmental education. We have two big projects in our project about negotiations. So we're talking about how we are envisioning our neighborhood in 10 years. And then we're talking about how we could implement this vision, which measures we should take in order to realize these visions. So, as said before, we must not conclude with commenting on the internet. That is not helpful. And the way the regional councils work is not helpful either. They are forcing people to participate, but it's not enough to publish something on the internet and gather comments or organize a conference. We must say that there is this obligation of participation through the regulation. It's not something they can opt for or opt out from. And we must see what measures can be taken to reach these results. So we have participatory design, as said by Maria. We have local sustainability, sustainable development, sorry. And we see that this is affected in many issues. We are creating mechanisms that are very far away from our society and that do not help the society to get involved. We have 10 more minutes. Let's try to include 3 more comments. I'm just saying this to have a good time management. We had a comment that there is a difference between participation and engagement and active participation. And what we need is engagement, of course, from citizens. This comment was made by a person who uses a nickname. I'm not sure if it's a he or a she. So the other comment is if there is a problem of technological solution in the decarbonization of heating. This is a difficult question, I must admit. I think it's an issue of political preferences. We have solutions. The cost of materials are increasing. That's why we have financing tools to resolve this problem. So we are financing sufficient material. We don't have enough workforce. We know that we have about 160,000 new jobs for isolation. We have a great insufficiency in Greece. We don't have workers in Greece. So we need specialized, trained workers. And we know that within 10 years, people must be upskilled when they're working with energy upgrading. So these are technical issues of workforce. All other things beyond that are issues of political will. We have laws, we have regulations, these have been approved, these have been talked about, but they're not implemented and nobody wants to implement them. And that's a problem. And we've seen that other things are being implemented that were not included in the energy reform plans. And I want to add something about engagement, about active participation, that education in schools is very important. We've seen this working, and this is creating generations of citizens that can be more efficient. And what we've seen that is lacking on a kindergarten level as well, where we have different action plans for energy and the climate. So we've seen there that there was never an essential talk between institutions and citizens. And one reason of that is that we didn't have an expanded implementation of the different energy plans. We've seen that monitoring reports that have been provided are not sufficient. But the reason is that citizens and people who will be affected by these measures were never involved in the discussions. On a local level, that would be something relatively easy. So this is also important in order to effectively implement policies. I wanted to raise a question to all four of you. The Green Deal is a series of programs and priorities that must be assessed. I think we have already mentioned the way we are approaching this implementation of different sectors of the Green Deal. Do you think we have the sufficient indicators to assess the implementation of the programs? I think Nikos has already mentioned about some tools. This is a question, a comment to you. So can we measure social impact? Do we have tools to measure real indicators regarding the future of the Green Deal? Let's start with the ladies of this panel, Mrs. Dimou, Mrs. Mourzaki. Maybe you could make a brief comment, and then I will ask the last question and we can conclude. Please unmute your microphone. Regarding the assessment of the social impact, I think I'm not competent to reply to this question, but since I know that the National Center of Social Research, that is also a partner in CLIMPACT, has different drafts, different reports, and I think we can search for answers for such questions. I think I'm not competent to assess social impact, but I think in research this is something that is being taken into consideration. Mrs. Mourzaki, as Mrs. Dimou said, I think it's taking place in some municipalities, in some places, but we could do more. We could harness tools that already exist in order to assess social impact. We could develop these tools to see how we could adjust them better. But I also have this feeling that we have tools which could be improved. A very short comment. In this motion of connecting policy decision-making centers and citizens, we need strategic proposals. When we could draft strategic tests that would refer financing sources, measures, effective measures, realistic measures, then we would have a real pathway. But now, since we don't have this text, we don't have something tangible to start with. I think only if we had such text, we could talk about the implementation of the efficient measures that we need. I think I agree with Maria with what she said before. I think companies are writing these plans, these designs, these programs without important negotiations, but all these suggestions are not transformed into binding commitments. We're talking about jobs, for example, but we're not mentioning in which sectors, with what kind of sustainability. Vlassis mentioned it, and I have read it also in a study. If we want to reach our Green Deal goals, And if we want this green upgrade, we need jobs. We have a great insufficiency in jobs. And this is a challenge because we can create new jobs in sectors where we see a dynamic today. So we can reform, for example, with young people who have studied and right now are working in delivering. They could, for example, upskill through flexible training systems, training programs to rapidly respond to the needs of today's, where we need new schemes of energy efficiency to connect different jobs. So IT, with blockchain technologies, with engineers who know their way around energy, with people who know construction, with sociologists who can activate local communities. So what we said before, we need cooperative models. I'm not talking about 5 people. We're talking about bringing together people with different experience to have a common direction. Thank you. Do you want to add something, Mr. Oikonomou? I agree with everything that has been said before. And Moudzaiki said something very different, very important, that the problem is when we monitor these programs, they often cover each other. Even if we see only the energy model, we can understand that the European Commission has set some actions, some targets, but because you have 10 different texts that have not been discussed about by the group itself. For example, we're talking about the renovation of buildings with long-term strategies. This is an old text. If we compare this to a national plan and we see other policies, we see that we're lagging behind. But we've seen that the new directives for renewable energy sources, we've seen that we have obligations for cooling, for heating. We have new directives for energy savings. And we understand that all these plans, all these texts must be harmonized in one common plan for Greece. And if we don't do that, we will have this fragmentation of targets, of strategies, of purposes, and we will not be able to see what we have achieved. We can only say that we have saved so much carbon, for example, but we will not have an overall target, an overall outcome. So thank you very much, everybody from the first and the second panel, Mrs. Doussis, Mrs. Geese, Mrs. Dimou, Mr. Oikonomou, and Mrs. Moudzaiki, as well as Mr. Chrysogelos. It was a very constructive discussion. We had a good flow. We could understand that these 2 topics that we have set for this event, the European Green Deal for All and the Green Deal for Greece, are connected issues, are requirements for success. This material and much more will be available on the website of Heinrich Böll Foundation, but also on the website of the Wind of Renewal, and the entire video on English and Greek. For all of you who could not attend the event throughout until the end, as said at the beginning, we have the dossier on the website. At the beginning of the new year, we will add some new text there. Please allow us this window of time until the beginning of the new year. So we will talk in this dossier about the EU Green Deal in Greece and the European Union. And I hope we will have the opportunity to talk again, to gather again with the support of the Office of the European Parliament in Athens and of the Social Cooperative Enterprise Wind of Renewal. Thank you very much for providing us food for thought with your presentations. I want to thank our co-organizer, Mr. Nikos Chrysogelos from Wind of Renewal and the Office of the European Parliament in Athens, the Istros Production Service, the team of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, Kiki Medaxa for preparing and organizing this event. And of course, I want to thank all of you who have attended this event, who have shared their thoughts, comments, questions. I think we will have many opportunities in the new year to meet again, to talk about all these issues and about new issues that we will present. So thank you once again. I hope you will have a joyful Christmas season, a good new year, a good start in the new year, and I hope this new year will find us all in a better place. So thank you very much and have a good